Hello, how are you? Yeah, thanks. Good to see you. Thanks. No one else to introduce? Peter will do it.
Okay, I'll start. It's a pleasure to have Susan Marks with us today.
Wait.
Oh, what?
Welcome back. I've got to call us back to order.
Okay.
We're going to begin our final committee, which is Committee of the Whole. We have 4 items on our agenda. The first one of those is an annual report from the Commission Against Domestic Violence. Its Director Susan Marks is here, but first we'll go to Mayor Kelly.
Well, you just said what I was going to say because I thought she shouldn't have to introduce herself. But I also want to, as always, appreciate the domestic violence organizations in our community for the work they do. And I'm looking forward to hearing the report, Susan. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So I've been introduced twice, so I won't introduce myself. But I will say, most of you have heard me talk before, and I know it's the last committee of the day, but I talk fast. So turn on your listening ears, and I hope you had some coffee. So I've heard if you focus, you can keep up. So just a brief reminder about the history of the commission that we were formed in 1998. The City of Bellingham and Whatcom County got together and did joint ordinances to form the DV Commission, which means that we are one of the commissions of the city and of the county, and really a demonstration to our community and to other communities that we live in a place that is committed to ending domestic violence. And our mission is to provide leadership on our community's efforts to reduce and prevent domestic violence. And what that means is, first, it means we don't do the ground level work. We're not doing the direct services that we have some other excellent agencies in this community that do that. We are doing the leadership level, the systems level. We're trying to raise consciousness in the community about domestic violence and its impacts. We're identifying and promoting policies and practices that could improve our community response, and we're building the skills and tools for community professionals who are working in the field of domestic violence, for agencies that are responding to domestic violence, and for other community partners. So we're really trying to build the capacity of this community to end domestic violence, and when there is domestic violence, to respond in the best possible way. And our commission, we have 28 members, and they're all leaders in our community. On that slide are the members who are, on the left are employees of the City of Bellingham, and then on the right are members who are appointed by the City of Bellingham, by the mayor, to be on the commission. All of the members, we also have members appointed by and who work for the county, and then others who work for the small cities or other places in the community. And the idea is that all of these people are leaders in their realms. We have people from criminal justice, healthcare, including mental health care, major employers, tribal representatives, nonprofits, public health, schools. And the idea is that all of these people have knowledge about their own disciplines. They also have resources in terms of connections, not only in terms of money, but in terms of connections in the community, and the ability to make change and make decisions. So by these people coming together and identifying the problems in our response to domestic violence and solutions, we can really make change happen, which is really exciting. And our funding, we have our local government funding is our primary general operating support. That is not in order of importance. I realize I should probably have the City of Bellingham at the top. It's reverse order of importance. So the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County are really our primary funders, and we're extremely grateful. We could not operate without those two entities. The City of Ferndale also provides some funding, I think partly to show their demonstration that they are really committed to ending domestic violence. And then we have 3 current grants from the Department of Justice, Office of Violence Against Women, and two of those grants, actually the top one and the bottom one, the Bellingham Police Department is our fiscal agent, so a local government had to apply, and the City of Bellingham has been our applicant on, I think, 7 different grants, all of which we have received, and continues to be our fiscal agents in managing the finances for that and putting out contracts for that work. So another way that the city has shown its commitment to just really helping us operate and get the funding we need to provide the services we need in the community. So I'm going to talk about 3 different initiatives that we are working on currently. One is work that we are doing with faith communities, and this is actually one of the areas that we are increasing our focus with. We got increased funding from the City of Bellingham and Whatcom County this year, and this is one of the areas that we have chosen to increase our outreach. And one of the reasons we chose to work with faith communities is we had seen research that shows that many or more victims tell their clergy about domestic violence than all other helping professionals combined, and that made us think we really needed to be working with our local clergy to improve and support their resources and their ability to address change in domestic violence. We also want to be engaging more community members in responding to domestic violence, and an organized place to find those family and friends and neighbors is often in faith communities. So I encourage you, there's the website for the resource we put together. To put this together, we interviewed local clergy, we did several focus groups with local survivors of domestic violence, and we also did a review of national literature and national resources and tools for faith communities. And when we did that, what we found was that the clergy that we interviewed very much wanted to have more information, wanted to have more tools for responding to domestic violence, both in the prevention and the response realm. The focus groups we do with survivors, we heard stories of people who were not allowed to go to their faith community anymore. We heard people who felt that they'd never heard what a healthy relationship was from their faith community, and they were saying they really did want, those who were a member of a faith community wanted to hear both prevention and response messages from the leadership. And then what we saw in our national research was that there was no good, we actually thought, well, maybe we'll find this resource and then we'll bring it to our faith communities. And there was nothing that had everything in one place. So if you had time to research all this stuff, which is one of the things that we do, you could find things. But for someone who is also responsible for an entire congregation and many other issues and volunteers and staff, that time is probably not there. So we put together this toolkit, which includes information about dynamics, statistics, myths and facts, and some guiding principles for faith communities in addressing domestic violence. It has some specific ideas for how to work with the victim and children and offenders, including specific questions and words and ways to ensure safety. And then it has some tools for prevention strategies, so those upfront strategies for promoting healthy relationships. And then the end part is where the end of it, this is part of why we have it online, we really pulled together links to a bunch of things that you can find nationally and put it all in one place. So there are sample sermons and faith talks, interpretations of religious texts, prevention programs for faith community survivor stories, sample policies, and other resources. So it's just supposed to be a one-stop place for faith communities to get all the resources they need. And we are looking at doing some work in October for DV Action Month to recruit faith communities to choose and implement prevention activities from the toolkit in their communities and to work with their congregation members to do prevention work in their own lives with their own families and whatever community they're a part of. Another project, I put this sandwiched in between. I think the work we're doing with faith communities is really hopeful about prevention. And then I'm going to talk about some work we're doing in schools, which is prevention focused and really hopeful. And then there's this work that we're doing with the criminal justice system, which is very response focused. But actually it is looking at trying to prevent domestic violence homicides. So the first thing I want to point out to people who really care a lot about data is these are not the same years. So the most recent numbers we have from Bellingham Police Department that have been compiled and reported are from 2015, but we compile these lethality assessment program LAPs, so we have 2016 data, and the high-risk team we facilitate, and so we have that data. But I think it's a useful picture because the numbers don't fluctuate that much from year to year, so you can still kind of see how the work we're doing with right now on high-risk domestic violence is taking the big picture and kind of funneling it down to who are the most at-risk victims and who are the most at-risk offenders. So quick definitions. Domestic violence verbals are when law enforcement arrives and there's no probable cause to make an arrest. It does not mean that there's not domestic violence. About 90% of what happens in an abusive relationship is not illegal, so those can be a good indicator that there is some abuse in that household. Domestic violence offenses mean law enforcement arrived at the scene and made an arrest. And these are all Bellingham numbers. Lethality assessment program, 107 lethality assessment program screens were conducted in 2016. This is a screen law enforcement does on the scene of a domestic with the victim if they think they're at high risk for lethality. And you have a copy actually of the screen in your packets. It's 11 questions. And then a victim screens in if she or he answers yes to a certain number. Either there's certain questions that automatically trigger that they're identified as high risk, or there's a combination of questions. It's a validated tool that's used nationally. So in 2016, you can imagine that probably in the realm of law enforcement responding to around 1,400 in Bellingham calls for service. In about 100 of those cases, they thought there's a reason to conduct this screen, that there might be high risk in this case, and then in 53 of those, the victim screened in as high risk. So what they do on the scene is they direct that victim they contact directly domestic violence sexual assault services, get that victim on the phone immediately and connected for services and safety planning. And then we further take these lethality assessment program screens and identify who are the offenders in our county who we think are at highest risk for committing homicide or very serious assault. And we currently have 35 of those offenders who are monitored by a high-risk team. And this is a criminal justice-focused team. It's criminal justice professionals, multidisciplinary members who are looking for these highest risk offenders and increasing the way we communicate about them, our oversight of them, and our sanctions for those offenders. So currently, we have 35 different offenders that team is monitoring. And that one, actually, I couldn't pull out just the Bellingham number because one of the reasons these people are so high risk is because they are crossing jurisdictions, and so many of them touch Bellingham in one way or another. So I'm going to tell you this kind of to clear a story that would kind of clarify how this all funnels down. And the story does, in fact, touch Bellingham in addition to several other jurisdictions. So there was, last summer, a survivor who she had left her partner. She was homeless. She was moving around the county to avoid her abuser. She was staying with different friends and family, moving frequently. But the offender kept finding her and harassing her. She already had a no-contact order in place against him. So in addition to just the general harassment, he was breaking a no-contact order. So one time last summer around June, he finds her in Bellingham and he is yelling at her. He's accusing her of cheating on him. He strangles her and he's punching her and kicking her. A neighbor comes over, actually calls 911 and then comes over and starts yelling at the offender. And so the victim is able to get away. She gets in her car and locks herself in the car until the police arrive. When officers arrive, they see a suggestion this could be a high-risk case. They do this lethality assessment program screen with her, ask the 11 questions, and she screens in as high risk. And so immediately she's connected to an advocate from DVSAS for some immediate safety planning, then some ongoing support in the future. As the advocate from DVSAS works with her over a little bit of time, she decides this is one of the cases that we need to refer to this high-risk team. This offender has a lot of really scary behaviors in addition to this one incident. So when we bring the team together, everyone looks in their own records. This is one of the things that they do is they look within their own databases, with that, whatever they have within their own systems, and they bring that information to the team. And here's what we found out. So with this victim, the offender had charges of assault and violations of a no-contact order in Bellingham Municipal Court. He had open charges in Whatcom County Superior Court for molesting the child of a former girlfriend. He had open charges in Whatcom County District Court for assaulting his former girlfriend, the mother of the child he had molested. Since his most recent arrest, he had assaulted the victim again in Ferndale, so he had charges in Ferndale courts, and he is on monitoring by both District Court probation and Ferndale probation from all of these. They also figure out pretty quickly that this is someone who is benefiting from all these systems being different in the way that they enter information, the way that they sanction offenders. So bail was set fairly low in each of the courts because they're each just have one charge, and so he's meeting bail and getting out of jail pretty quickly. He had also been released one time inadvertently due to a jail error. He had failed to appear at several hearings in different courts, but was not being held fully responsible for that because, again, each court only had one piece of the picture. And the victim knows that this is happening. She knows that he's not being held accountable. She doesn't know why, but she keeps saying he's going to get away with this. For whatever reason, she doesn't know if the police don't want to stop him or can't stop him, but she feels like they're not going to keep her safe. She doesn't understand why, even though she's hiding and he should be in jail, he keeps getting out and finding her. So the advocate is starting to also be concerned that she's going to disengage from the criminal justice system and we're not going to be able to prosecute him. So this is one where the team was very concerned about kind of an immediate possible action on his part, and so they were able to each put together that full picture from all the records and bring it back to their own departments. So all the involved probation officers, law enforcement, prosecutors, and courts knew the full picture of all these charges. So here's what happens. His bail is forfeit. He fails to appear in one court, and his bail is forfeited. And a bench warrant is issued when he fails to appear in another court. So multiple law enforcement jurisdictions start actively looking for him, not just having a warrant out, but they're actively seeking him. And the Bellingham Police Department finds him and arrests him. His first appearance is in Ferndale Court, and his bail is set much higher than previously. So he's unable to post bail, and he does remain in jail. The Whatcom County prosecutors, because they can have jurisdiction over all of these cases, take jurisdiction and negotiate a plea agreement that involves all the charges. He's convicted to 51 months in prison, and then he's released, and these are really important things. He'll be supervised by a Department of Corrections officer, community corrections officer, and also by a district court probation officer. And that ongoing supervision is really important to keeping people safe. And the high-risk team will continue monitoring him when he's released. And also while he's in prison, the Department of Corrections representative on our high-risk team will keep tabs on his behavior. And so if there's if he breaks no contact orders from prison, they can add that onto his time. So I want to be really clear that we know that prison and jail are not the answer for every criminal justice case, and especially not for domestic violence. But this is a case where he was not responding at all to interventions, and that his removal, his ability to be, her ability to be free from him gives her the time that she needs to heal, to get safe, to set up whatever she needs to set up in her life, and to really show him that seriously, this community is taking his behavior very seriously, and that he will have sanctions. So that's an example of how this coordination of bringing people together, and so there's 35 of these people that the team is monitoring, really allows us to share information in a way that is not normally shared and hopefully increase our ability to hold people accountable. And then, on a more hopeful note, we have work where they're doing in schools, and we're not specifically working in the Bellingham School District, but this is one of our primary projects, and so is one of our funders. I thought it would be interesting to you. So you probably heard me talk about before that we had a grant called STEP from the Department of Justice for about 4 years, starting in 2012, and that was we partnered with the Ferndale School District and got that grant, and we were one of 9 sites in the nation to do this work to address dating abuse and sexual assault in secondary schools. And we had some outcomes including some protocols, staff training. We did do a youth summit countywide, which we had youth from most of the districts in the county attend, and then we had on-site services and prevention education provided in the schools. Based on our work with this pilot project, we applied for another grant to the Department of Justice to expand this work, and we were the only STEP site that got to continue this work. The other STEP sites did not get a continuation grant, and we were the only site here on the West Coast, so we're still continue being somewhat of a pilot. And this allows us to take that work and also work with elementary students in Ferndale and with the elementary through high school in the Blaine and Mount Baker school districts. And we'll be looking at prevention and response for students who are experiencing domestic violence in their homes, dating abuse in their own relationships, or sexual assault in their own relationships. We have a lot of partners who will be providing services as a part of this grant. One of our goals is to set up referral and identification systems so that we can get services into the schools. And we're also focusing on a few populations who are at highest risk just because of the way that the Department of Justice is set up, as they ask you to find, which I think is great, they ask you to find what are some populations that are highest risk in your community and that are underserved. They're not getting as many services, maybe not as many culturally specific services, or not as highly being identified. So we also are working specifically with Native American children, youth who identify as LGBTQ+, and youth who are homeless or runaway. So this just started late this fall, and we are currently conducting a strengths and needs assessment for those 3 districts, which we will be reviewing the data and starting our strategic planning for that assessment at our annual meeting this year, which I believe you all got invitations to, but I'm going to extend it verbally. And even though, again, it's not the Bellingham district, but we don't have a reason, there are some cultural differences in some of these communities, and the overall picture of what youth are experiencing in their homes and in their own relationships is not very different in different communities or in different places, even in this country. And so I think some of our information that we gather from talking to youth and families and staff will be applicable across the county. So we'll be looking at these findings and starting to develop some recommendations for working with these schools in the future, and we'll also be developing some recommendations for where we can pull in the other school districts. This grant is focused on 3, but we would like county-wide there to be some things looking at maybe policy, staff training, education for parents, and prevention programming for students. So that meeting is on May 25th. It's from 8 to 10 a.m. We're at the Leopold in their small chandelier room, and there will be breakfast refreshments. So if you're thinking about attending, please RSVP so that we can make sure we have enough food. And if anyone has any questions or comments about anything, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Susan. I'd like to start off with a question, if I may. One of the big issues that we're facing right now has to do with homelessness. And I was talking to someone recently, and he said that here in Bellingham, as much as 2/3 of the women who are homeless are survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault. Is that truly the case?
I believe so. Yeah, the most recent from the the Whatcom County Point in Time Count report. I think their 2016 report didn't include that question about homelessness, but they told me they'd add it back in again for the next year. Maybe it was 2017, but the most recent year for which they had it, I can't remember these. Yes, but it was upwards of 50%. Had said that was a contributing factor to their homelessness. So it might not have been the last factor, but that the person who answered the question, so the person who was homeless, believed that domestic violence was a part of that reason to be homeless. And I will say especially, so one of our commission members appointed by the city is Rhiannon Bardsley from Northwest Youth Services, and she very frequently says that she cannot think of any youth that she has worked with that has not experienced domestic violence or sexual assault or both. So I think especially for young people is very much a factor of their homelessness.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Thank you for your presentation today. The lethality assessment screening tool, is that universally used or uniformly used by all Bellingham police officers?
Yes, so they all have a protocol they follow. There's like 3 or 4 different factors that would lead them to conduct it. If they've been to the house before, anytime they make an arrest, and if it's been in the house before, if they make an arrest, or if they just have a reason to believe, so if they have that kind of instinct of this does not seem right, they can conduct it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Roxanne?
Before I became an elected, I sadly learned that of 6 other members of my tribe that are all females, I was the only one that had not been in a domestically violent situation. And so that really ignited my passion for this work, and it's one of the major reasons why I'll always fight to support this work. I especially appreciate that you're incorporating the tribes, because you may hear that it's a problem in tribes. I'm here to say that it's very real for my tribe, and I'm sure it's very real for Lummi also. And also just wanted to suggest that I help with managing a teen program at my tribe, and so I'd love to create some connectivity that way too.
I would love to connect with you, because one of the things we're working with the Mount Baker School District, and we definitely are trying to build stronger relationship with the Nooksack tribe for that work, and 2 of our connections there
Turn the microphone more to your mouth.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd love to connect with you more about that. I will definitely get in touch with you.
I'll be
Thank
happy
you.
to help. Thank you.
Yeah.
April?
Thanks again, and I appreciate that you talk really fast, but you're very clear, and it's easy to follow you if you concentrate. So luckily I have that skill on occasion. You know, what you're doing is so important, and I think it kind of relates back to putting into our comprehensive plan adverse childhood experiences and what they are. And it's very rare in my experience in all the literature that I've looked at that somebody suffers domestic violence and doesn't suffer one of those other ones, an imprisoned parent, you know, somebody who's dealing with mental illness. And just that vicious cycle that it creates. And it was interesting because recently at our the jail task force meeting, whatever we attended on Friday, there were several people asking, like, what are we doing on the forefront, like, before people get in there? And your work is really doing that. And I think it's important that even more of us get trauma informed, understanding that there is no maladapted child. The children are simply adapted to what they're dealing with. So anytime you come into contact with a child and you're thinking, gosh, what is this behavior and why is this child acting that way? They're acting that way because that's the way that they survive. And if we all just take a moment and think about how we're going to respond to them and how we're going to actually take those adverse experiences and build resilience out of them, because it doesn't, even if I have 6 of them and I'm here, you know, so, I mean, it's certainly if there's support in our community, but I think it's great, and I hope that as you all are working out in the community, you're passing along that, not just the part of the adverse childhood experience, but that resiliency piece that each one of us has an opportunity every time we come in contact with a child or anybody that's been suffering from these issues. So thank you so much, and keep up your work.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that input.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for the work and pass on that to your team, and particularly when it comes to the work that you're doing in the schools and the Safe Futures program. So obviously you're doing something right if you won a grant again, so congratulations. I think anything we can do to help our youth understand that things are not their fault is really important work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dan?
I'm wondering if you could just maybe briefly talk about the challenges that you have with working with the survivor in terms of housing and how that intervention piece works. So what happens to that person? Or, I mean, I didn't know it's different in many circumstances, but what can typically happen?
Okay, so I will say, first of all, that this is not, because it's been a long time since I've done direct services, and I don't do them in this community, that it's just kind of some general information. But I think it's similar, actually, to probably what you hear about other people who have trouble maintaining or keeping housing is the trauma can not only affect sometimes people's ability immediately to get housing, but sometimes the ability to stay in housing. In the past, I've worked with people who've left housing because they might be then next to someone who's experiencing domestic violence and that's triggering, or next to someone who looks like someone who sexually assaulted them. And if your housing is through your partner, that's a whole other thing. They might have the money, so either you might not have the money to get housing, or you might lose your housing because they get to keep the housing. I think it's a huge thing to have. We have a great local shelter, and that doesn't house everyone, and I know we're expanding our housing, and there just is never enough safe housing. So I think those are some of the primary things, is getting people in places that are safe and just really recognizing the need maybe to work with someone to figure out what's the right fit, and if the first thing isn't the right fit, they might need to go somewhere else, and people generally aren't making up a reason to not be in housing. It's that they really just, something is not working for them there. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying. I'm really concerned about our low vacancy rate and the rental prices increasing, and populations at the margins tend to suffer the most.
Yes.
And it's very concerning that a person who is experiencing this trauma then has to go and try to find housing and stabilize that way. So
Yes, and it's a little bit of a because there's a low vacancy rate. There's a lot of running around and trying to be first or best, person who applies, and it's hard to be that. Maybe if you don't have a steady income or you have stuff going on in court, and also the services that people need are downtown, and it's hard. Other than some of the low income housing, the neighborhoods close to downtown are fairly expensive, and so it's hard for people to get in somewhere where you could get downtown for DV/SAS, the courts, anything that you need downtown. So I think those are additional barriers. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susan, very much. Keep up the good work, and see you again next year. We'll go on to our second item, which is a resolution to form a Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee. The City of Bellingham Fire Department and Whatcom County Fire Protection District Number 8 desire to explore the possible formation of a Regional Fire Authority. A resolution is presented to the Council now, which would appoint 2 council members to be identified by us to sit on the RFA Planning Committee along with Mayor Kelly, and 3 Fire District 8 commissioners that would be appointed by the District Board of Commissioners. These 6 elected officials will comprise the Bellingham Fire District 8 RFA Planning Committee. So this is not a commitment to form a regional fire authority, but we have to have this planning level body to even decide whether we'll move in that direction. We have before us Fire Chief Bill Newbold. Would you like to say some more?
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Bill Newbold from the Fire Department. Great summary there, Michael, on the process. And just to comment on your last statement, that is correct. The Planning Committee is a step in the process to fully evaluate the formation of a fire authority. It does not commit either of the agencies entering into that committee. It does not commit either of those agencies to actually form the fire authority. It is the body that would be put together to evaluate all the services to be delivered, the funding sources available, the efficient means of that. And that is all contained in what is called the plan, the RFA plan that would be developed. By way of summary, from our April 24th meeting where we presented, the plan would be put together by the Planning Committee. The plan would then be adopted by the Planning Committee, and then the RFA plan comes back to each of the governing bodies, the full City Council for approval or rework, and then also the District Board of Commissioners for approval or additional work.
Okay, and so the resolution would appoint 2 council members. What is the estimated time frame that we're looking for this planning process?
An estimated time frame just based on the amount of work that's ahead of us and seeing the histories of other departments go through this process, I think we're looking realistically anywhere between 12 to 18 months. And that's going to be all based on not only the amount of work to be achieved, but the schedules of the members that are put together on the Planning Committee. The Planning Committee is serving as direction and advisory to the 2 agencies. And then, should this be formed, should the council pass the resolution, it will be my recommendation that we convene a meeting as soon as we could, hopefully by the end of May or within the next 30 days. And then one of the things that I would bring forward at that meeting is a recommendation to form a steering committee. And that steering committee is where a lot of the work would be done, and then again brought back to the planning committee.
Okay. April?
And that steering committee is, if I remember from your information the last time, that will have union representation.
The steering committee, absolutely.
Steering committee.
It's a recommendation that I would bring forward and has proven very beneficial in other departments that have gone through this process. One or more labor representatives on that. We would have city staff on that, representing the mayor's office, finance, fire administration. We would be reaching out as necessary to legal, IT, human resources, et cetera, not only from the city standpoint, but also from the District 8 commissioners.
Thank you.
Well, April, go ahead.
I move that we pass the resolution.
So
Well, before we pass the resolution, we need
yes, two
we need
action
people.
items.
I personally would like to volunteer as one of the members. I know, Terry, you talked about this.
I've stated I'd like to volunteer on that.
Is there a third member who'd also be
Having
interested?
served on the jail task force, go for it.
Some of you are already got your dance cards pretty full, but is there a third member who would be interested in this?
Sorry, so you're wanting 3, or I thought originally it was
Two.
I'd like two
no, I'm
members.
just seeing if there's more
Yes.
than two. Otherwise, it's a really easy decision.
No, I'd be interested in attending. I more just want to learn about the whole process so that it feels like it makes a little bit more sense as it comes forward. So, but I don't need to be seated at the table. I can be in the audience.
Yeah, these would be open meetings, I assume. So I'm going to go ahead and move that to the resolution we add the names Councilmember Terry Borneman and Councilmember Michael Lillquist.
Second.
Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, so this is the motion to add those two names. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And now we have the resolution. And should we just go, is there a recommendation on passing the resolution?
I move that we pass the resolution to form a Regional Fire Authority Planning Committee.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this? I don't know if Mayor Kelly, you want to say anything on this?
Well, while this isn't exactly the same as the EMS work group and steering committee and leadership committee, it's the same. It's kind of the same structure, and so we're starting the discussion about planning before we actually have what it is we're going to do, which I think is very helpful, and I appreciate the committee council members' willingness to participate in this, because as we know, Terry was involved with the last EMS one. They do end getting a little technical and time consuming, but I think the results for EMS were really good. So I'm hoping that this one turns out the same way.
Well, so to be clear, my attitude is pretty skeptical. This might be the best idea, but we don't know yet. And I think that's the point of the exercise, is for all to figure out whether or not this really is in the best interests, for the community. Dan?
So the work product of this theoretically could be putting something in front of voters. Is that correct?
That is correct. In developing the plan, going through the approval process of the planning committee, and then the planning committee would bring that back to both of the governing bodies in the form of them approving the plan, and then with the recommendation of putting a ballot measure to the voters. And that would be one single ballot measure to the coextensive area voting in on that.
And I should have said, because when we were talking about the recommendation that came back, obviously to Michael's point, it could be, no, we're recommending we don't proceed with this too. So it's the full range of options.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of recommending this resolution tonight signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously 7-0. Thank you very much. We'll now go on to another big heavy lift. This is a proposed jail facility use agreement. Whatcom County is proposing to build a new jail facility, and it would be funded by a voter-approved levy of 0.2% sales tax measure, which is pretty much what the county proposed last year in terms of the funding mechanism. However, Mayor Linville and the staff have negotiated principal terms for an agreement, and they will present the key terms of that proposed jail facility use agreement. The City and Council staff are continuing to negotiate certain specific provisions and working on final language for the agreement. This is in recognition that the County Council and the county still retains final authority over whether or not a matter goes before the voters to approve, but this would be the agreement for the use and the funding of that agreement. I don't know who wants to start with this. Is Mayor Kelly?
Yeah, I get to start because I got to sit for a long time with Brian and others to talk about when we originally looked at the jail agreement that was on the ballot, there were some concerns, obviously, about it. It did not pass the first time. And so we looked at this through the lens of what issues weren't addressed the last time. Now, we were not starting from scratch, and that was not necessarily my preference or maybe other people's preference. I would have preferred that. We were not starting from when the Jail Alternative Task Force made their recommendations. So dealing with those two things, the negotiation that we did several important things that I think I've heard council members talk about. It reduced the expected size, but it didn't dictate a size. The size is scalable and definitely is related to, I believe, the kind of alternatives that might come out of the jail task force. Unfortunately, I don't think that these things are necessarily synced up as well as they could be, but if you look at what the City of Bellingham's been able to do with the most talked about alternatives and what we've implemented and what we've seen, I think that there can be some estimation about where that right number is. Secondly, the concern that many of us had was that we wouldn't be able to put the initiative or we'd lose both 0.1% of our sales tax. And one of these things does, based on the reduced percentage of capital costs that we negotiated, is that we are going to be being able to retain almost as much money as if we went out for a sales tax vote on our own. So that capacity, those resources to implement alternatives are going to be available to us. To me, it wasn't enough to just acknowledge the jail alternative recommendations. I wanted to see that there was some commitment to implement them. And the ones that I'm most interested in, that I've heard community members be interested in, is the things that reduce incarceration and recidivism. There may be a lot of recommendations that come out of the jail alternatives work group, but the ones that I wanted to see the commitment to was the ones that will keep people out of jail and keep people from coming back to jail. We've also asked a lot of questions about data. And the oversight board that we put in place, one of their jobs is to track data. And that means at those kinds of oversight committee meetings, we can ask the county, or they can ask us or anybody else, what are the, we need information about this. And information has been very difficult to come by. So I feel like that gives us a better opportunity to chart the use of funds than we might have had before. The other thing is the 0.1% on that particular, the existing 0.1%. There was an agreement that will go into the jail fund, and it will be able to be tracked as a 0.1% that the citizens or the residents in Whatcom County have already voted for, and we want to be sure we know what that money is being used for. And finally, the last thing was, as you know, we have taken an inordinate hit on people being able to leave people in our jail, especially for many of us, the pretrial people that we've been having to send, over to Yakima. And one of the last things that we agreed to for the future, and that we're talking about for the present, though Brian can talk about where we are in that agreement, is that like all misdemeanors will be treated the same. So it isn't your jurisdiction that dictates who stays and who goes. It's whatever the charges, or we could decide that all pretrial misdemeanors get to stay, and others, we're going to have to make the decision in the other way. And I would hope that we'd look at the whole jail system, and as we're, for the next however many years, if this passes, then we're building a new jail, or if this doesn't pass and we're dealing with the facility we have, that we look at the best way to use the jail space we have and who should be in the community, in the local jail, and who might be better served going to Yakima or someplace else. So Brian, do you want to, first of all, Brian can answer specific questions because he's been working on that, but I want you to know that I realize that this is not a perfect document, and I think there's probably everybody that was sitting around the table who doesn't think it's a perfect document. I don't think that anybody thinks that, I got everything I want. But I will tell you, for me, because I wasn't supportive of the last agreement that went forward to the voters, I feel like the questions that I had, the concerns I had, were made better with this agreement. And that's why I'm willing to bring it forward to you. Obviously, you make the final decision about what you think about it and whether you want to support it. But I feel like we've made significant progress in looking at those issues if we want to move forward on a jail. Obviously, we didn't talk about location. The size is scalable. If we decide to go alone on those issues, then I don't know how that will work as far as where we will be in taking responsibility for our inmates in the jail. So this was an attempt to look at keeping our criminal justice systems county-wide, being part of a jail where we treat all inmates the same, and making sure that all of us have the commitment to alternatives and the resources to implement what we would like to do. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. You can ask Brian, or I don't know, Brian, if there's anything else you want to add.
Brett Henrich, Mayor's Office. I think all I would add is, I think maybe Michael mentioned it, I think you did, Mayor, is that we continue to work on the agreement itself. You obviously noticed it's not in the packet because it was incomplete. I think to do that, we are hoping to finish that up sooner than later. Obviously, I think we want to come back to you on May 22nd, I think, is our goal with the agreement for a work session to discuss some of those things. But what we did provide, and the mayor referenced in the memo, is so there was that, those things.
The three things that were required, because I think that was something that I wasn't paying attention to. What the jail work group.
Oh, sorry. So the mayor's referencing last Friday's jail work group meeting, of which Pinky and Jean participated on. Remember, the jail work group was a creation of Whatcom County Council to look at the financial agreements around the facility, the funding mechanism, and then the cost allocation as well. And I know Marie spent some time on the motion from that body on Friday. I want to say, and I hope others will correct me, but I want to say that the group affirmed the direction on those three items, meaning that continue with the interlocal, the use of the 0.2% sales tax, and then the cost allocation as referenced in the memo on the capital side. So that body did on Friday affirm that, and I believe they will be sending a letter to that effect to the Whatcom County Council, and then following that they did vote to, I guess, disband, for lack of a better word. So that component of work is done from the jail work group. However, Peter and I continue to work with Whatcom County on some of the language in the interlocal, which we'll bring back this month.
So procedurally speaking, would we be asked to approve that jail facilities use agreement before there's a November ballot, or would that just sort of be ready and written and then would be signed only if the voters approved?
No, good question. Whatcom County's intention is to have the cities sign it before. That was what they wanted to do in 15 as well, but have that signed and so that it's and in fact have Whatcom County sign it prior to putting that on the ballot in June. Yeah.
And then if the voters don't approve it, the agreement just becomes void.
Correct.
Okay.
Peter, do you want to add anything to that? No.
So I'm seeing April and Dan and Pinky and then Terry.
Mayor, you mentioned that we would get almost as much of the second percentage if we were to go out for it ourselves. How much is most?
It's a good question. So you'll have to forgive me, this is sort of back a napkin. So remember that every 0.1% sales tax in Bellingham is about, I want to say, sorry, I'm just doing the math, it's about maybe 2 million. Does that sound right, Peter?
Brian?
The TBD is 0.2%, and I believe that raises 4.5 million annually in the city. So figure a tenth is half that. In the agreement, and if you went that route where the city went out for its own tenth, we would keep 85% of it, and the county would get 15%. So 85% of, say, 2.5 million gets you right around that. 2.1, I think 2.2 million. The 0.2% countywide is estimated about $8 million in 2019. And so Bellingham and all the way state law works is the county gets 60% of that, and the cities get 40% based on their population. So we are approximately 70% of the we're 70% of the population of the cities. So it's 70% of the 40%. So 70% of 3.2 million. It's about 2.2 million.
Do I look like I'm following you?
Sort of.
I'm trying to look like I'm doing that.
That's back in napkin.
I think where I'm getting to is I think that's a really important point of this agreement, and thank you, Mayor, for really holding strong on that, because no matter what the county implements, we've shown that we're very progressive in the ways that we'd like to deal with these, and we need those dollars, and Chief was very clear about why we wouldn't support the original. But I think it would be really great to have it broken down, not back a napkin, for the community, so they can understand, like, whether we go with this and try to get a better facility or we go this route, we're still getting relatively, we'll still have that monies to do even beyond what was originally. I think that's a really important point, and I don't want the community to miss that.
Yeah, and I think we'd also have to look at what happens if we don't go along with this jail agreement and what it would cost us then to provide those own services ourselves. So we're not part of the jail, so it might not be a $1.5 million a year endeavor. It might be more than that. And then, so that will be something, obviously, that we'll have very specifically done for you as you enter your final deliberations on whether or not this is something you might want to support once Brian and Tyler and the others get the jail use agreement together.
Thank you.
Dan?
Thank you. I'm trying to get my head around the numbers as well, and so I'm trying to understand what is being asked from Bellingham for our commitment. So 15.8% is that's the number that they're asking for. That's
Correct.
down from what was 21% last time around.
It was it was 21%. That sounds right.
So our actual usage is 13.4%. Correct, over the last 3 years, if you average that. Mm-hmm. Now, we have realized a 25% reduction in our misdemeanor population, according to the presentation that Darlene Peterson, or perhaps it was Peter, made. I believe it was the incarceration task force, the prevention reduction task force. So we're seeing a 25% less of 13.5, basically, but yet we're being asked to fork over 15.8. So it's more than what we actually use. So I'm just trying to understand why we arrived, or why that task force arrived at that number, or that committee.
Well, philosophically, it is a 30-year commitment, and speaking to anybody that was involved in the group, it's very difficult to completely down to the percentage determine what your usage is going to be. So what we're just guaranteeing, because remember, this is the capital part. So what we're guaranteeing is that we will have space in the new jail that's quite a bit lower and that we won't be necessarily subsidizing as much as we were before the other users that aren't part of the capital facilities agreement. Am I close? I might be. He's shaking his head though, so I don't know.
Peter Raffato, Legal Department. Just some things to think about. I think we definitely have had a substantial decrease in overall incarceration, even when you include Yakima County. But there are so many sort of stories within the numbers. There were booking restrictions in 2016, and so that probably had an impact. And so, it's hard to be really scientific about what the usage is. So I just want to point out that there are, you can't simplify it too much, but yes, we did decrease our use of incarceration through the use of EHM. There's no doubt about that.
How many misdemeanors do we have in Yakima right now?
I don't have that number. The number I do have is that in 2016, including Yakima, our average daily use for both Whatcom County and Yakima was about 40, and that includes not only Bellingham only, but Bellingham plus inmates.
And how many beds are Bellingham beds in this agreement?
70.
Okay. I guess the efforts that the task force has undergone and the real numbers of the reduction, and I understand that booking restrictions are part of that, but we are going the other way in terms of being successful in this, primarily the home detention program, and the county, it looks like, is now looking at that as a more viable alternative through this friendship diversion services, the nonprofit that we use. So I don't understand. There's a huge disparity there between the amount of actual average number of current inmates. Are we expecting a surge in crime for the next 30 years? Or, what accounts for that gap between the 70 and the 40? And then we have these other services that we're doing, which presumably the number would go down, which it is going down right now. I don't understand why we're being asked to.
One of the things that came out of the last meeting was both the county council members that are on there, and I feel the same way. It was the county. We were not to determine size. So the county's going to determine size. So the percentage that we're talking about isn't going to be, the size isn't going to affect that, but the number of beds could, depending on what they decide to do. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that we weren't committing to such a small, less than we might need, especially since some of the people that go to the jail, that need to go to the jail, are going to be needing mental health and health care services that we would like to see them get outside the jail. But if they have to be in the jail, we certainly want them to have access to services in the jail too. So there could be some, obviously, if the majority of our council thinks that we've committed, to a too high a percentage, that's obviously something that you can change. We felt comfortable that we were being both cautious and prudent when we reduced the size, or reduced the percentage down to 15.7, because we don't know exactly, as Peter said, with booking restrictions and other things, and in the next 30 years exactly where we'll be. But I don't feel like now we're paying for, I don't feel like, in my mind, that we are subsidizing the other users and other people that aren't part of the capital contribution. So DOC, potentially some of the tribes, whoever that's using the jail but isn't part of the agreement because of, like, the tribes not collecting sales tax, and DOC just expecting the local governments to pay for it. So I think we're doing a lot better on that end of it. But it's not right on exactly the percentage of what we use, because we don't know what that percentage is exactly.
I have more questions, but I'll
We can come back to you, but I'm going to go on to Pinky right now.
Sure. We spent 9 months on this committee and looking at a lot of percentages. And actually, I don't know, Brian, if you wanted to throw this on there, but it does list out the actual percentages of what everyone else is paying. And I think this might help in regards to that particular question. That bottom one down there.
Is that
the county, by the way, is paying 78%, and that is the number that I think that I want us to focus on a little bit, because the county has taken on a much greater percentage than the original proposal. So it is not exact to that, but it does guarantee us a certain amount of beds for the future. So Bellingham, we are at 15.8, but if you look at in regards to population on the top, and distribution, and then what we're paying. So, no, it's not exactly with our reduction, but I will tell you that I am much more comfortable with the numbers that are in front of us today than the 22% that was in front of us last year. And so the number's not exact, but as close to as average in percentage I think that we could get to, that we could all agree on. And the fact that Whatcom County has taken a much heavier lift now in paying for this is makes me feel a lot better about it. But that wasn't even what I was going to talk about. So
before you go on, so that's the lower set of numbers is the sharing distribution.
The bottom part is the sharing distribution for the payment.
And I think it's important to note that there's a small change between Ferndale and Linden, just so people know that there was some change to these numbers, but our numbers stayed the same.
No, that's not the corrected version. You're right, April. It's add 27, I'm sorry, subtract 27,000 from Ferndale and add 27,000 to Linden.
Yeah.
That's what they negotiated. So that moves Linden up to, what is that, $120,000 capital payment, and Ferndale down to, I don't know, 190 or so.
So those will be adjusted. Anyway, so there's a couple of things about, again, it took us 9 months to get to some of these things. So I don't mean to simplify, but there was a lot of going back and forth on a lot of these negotiations. Part of the reason that I wanted to serve on this committee was to ensure that Bellingham taxpayers we're actually paying for our actual usage, which what you're saying, Dan, and I feel that we are in a much better position in regards to what our taxpayers are going to pay and how much usage we're going to actually have in the jail. And so I feel good about that. I also feel great about the fact that when we went into this discussion, the fact that jail alternatives and diversion programs were not an agreed upon, this is how we're going to operate and this is what our future looks like, and an emphasis on that. And the fact that this is now no longer a fee or an addendum, but this is an agreed upon measure on how we are going to operate the jail is a huge success. So that's something that I think is really important for people to know, the fact that we will be using all of the recommendations that the Jail Incarceration Task Force is providing, and the advisory board will be working with the jail facilities from now forward to ensure that these programs are run and funded adequately. So that is a huge success as far as I'm concerned of what came out of this. Another one is the fact that that it will be uniform reductions, so no booking restrictions going forward would mean that we could not be penalized for the things that we're doing, and that we will all be treated on the same playing field in regards to how this jail will be operated, so there can be no changes later on in that. And then the other one is the fact that there is actually an advisory board. This in itself is also amazing, because one of the challenges through this entire process has been the fact that we don't have a lot of statistics. There's no way to look for accountability. There's no way to figure out what's going on. I'll give you an example. Our bed per diem fee was raised considerably last year, but there was no way for us to know exactly what caused that. We had no control over it. Now, an advisory board will ensure that you can't just raise the per diem bed fees on us and then all of a sudden we're paying more money again, that this has something that would have to go through the advisory board. So these kinds of things that I think are implemented, which might not be really obvious, are extremely important, I think, in regards to the things that we came out of on this committee. And in saying that, I just wanted to say that there are some serious unsung heroes that were on this committee. Brian Heinrich and Peter Raffato and Tyler Schroeder over at the county really did all the heavy lifting and all the work and all the writing and all the research. And yes, we attended the committees, but I'll tell you, they gave us everything to make our decisions, and I really want to thank them for the work that they put into this.
Michael? I just want to add something to what Pinky said. The other thing that was agreed to is that someone from the Alternatives Task Force will be a part of the Oversight Committee. So that ongoing work that they're going to be doing will be reflected by somebody who actually sits on the committee.
Terry?
Just a question about on the jail size, under the previous failed attempt, there was at the first phase 521 with a phase 2 of 128. What's in here now, it's showing just one phase and scalable. And I'm glad to see one that at 36 beds are going to be for medical and behavioral health beds is added. But that plus the 440 and the possible 3% that bumps about 490, so you got about 30 beds less in the new proposal. We're not saddled with any phase 2? Or, as you said, it says scalable, but what's that scalable element mean? Are we committed to anything beyond on construction and pay for?
I think scalable in this context, when we were talking about scalable, we were talking about the 420 and whether it was going to be 420 or 380 or 521 or the original what they built to begin with. That's up to the council. There is only like a 3-pod construction. So the idea is that they'll put the infrastructure in there so that if in 30 years or 60 years or whenever they need to build more onto the jail, they don't have to add all the infrastructure in, but they're not going to have all the beds that would be possible there. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think we should build the whole thing out now because I would be afraid that we would try to fill it up if we did that. So there is a possibility or not a possibility of the 4th area being built at some time in the future, but that would be a separate decision. That's something that would still come to the councils, and it wouldn't be something that could be done automatically.
That would be a separate decision and a separate out to the voters to do it.
Yes,
so the phase 2, there is no, under this one, it's just that 440 base and.
Yeah, Brian, so this agreement does not commit us to capital contributions if there's a phase 2. Is that correct?
Correct. That's what I'm.
That would need to be renegotiated if there was a phase 2.
You'll see in the agreement, and Peter, I don't know if you have language off the top of your head, but basically what the agreement that we're working on right now that we'll bring back, I think it says something to the effect of should there be an expansion, that will be, all the parties will have to agree on their proportionate contribution to that. So it's a future decision.
And it's a decision both ways. If you want to participate, you'd have access. If you don't want to participate, you'd have access to what you originally committed to.
Correct.
Yes, real quick. I want to concur with what Pinky said about Brian and Tyler, the mayor and the county executive. Scott Cordice worked very hard on this too, the small cities. But in answer to Terry's question, the 440, that's, if I remember right, one of the reasons we had a long time of making a motion because the county council members didn't want any figure in there. Correct. No figure. because they're the ones that are going to be making the decision. So if I'm correct, when the jail use agreement comes back, there probably won't be any mention of the size of a jail until they decide what the number is.
I think what we have in there now is it reflects the 440 plus or minus, but it does acknowledge that it's a Whatcom County Council decision.
They were adamant on that. They wanted to make sure we weren't voting on a certain size, so it will come back with that language in it. But it was 9 long months, and it took a lot of work by a lot of people to get us where we are today. I think we're in a better position than we were last time, and kudos to our staff for what they did, and everybody worked really hard.
Peter, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just on the size issue, there was some discussion a lot of discussion on Friday about having a size in, and as Scott Cortez pointed out, and this is a risk for the cities, like let's just say, hypothetically, if the county said, you know what, we think 300 beds is enough. Okay. We're paying whatever we're paying, keeping in mind that felons get priority in this jail. So then where are you as a city if you're essentially not getting any capacity at all? So just keep in mind that that's why I think Scott was saying, we need to have some framework so that we know that when we're committing these funds, there's going to be some capacity there for the cities. And that's just a dynamic that has to be kept in mind the way this agreement is coming forward.
I just wanted to suggest a small but big thought. In 30 years, I think we are the community that is the most poised for the most population growth. With population growth could come criminal elements, and that's why I think maybe 15% might seem like a song 20 years from now. I'm not guaranteeing that. I don't know the statistics completely behind it, but I'm just saying with the way that I think we're going to grow, we might appreciate that number.
April?
Yeah, I have a question and then 2 comments. It's been mentioned a couple times that the equality piece, especially for pretrial, is going to, at some point, let me turn back. Judge Lev, when she came in, she mentioned that booking is really important because it's like the gatekeeper to us getting people into the programs. And so my question is, if this were to go out to the voters and pass, does that get enacted immediately so that or do we have to wait till it's built and then we get the equitability in?
I think the guarantee right now is when it's built, what Brian and Tyler and others are trying to figure out now with the sheriff and with the prosecuting attorney's office is what can we do immediately? Yeah. Personally, I think that we could do an equitability standard tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, if everybody had the same kind of agreements we have. So I would like to see that happen as soon as possible. And that's what they're trying to work out, is to how we can do that with people that might not agree with us.
Yeah, I think that is something I hope our community's going to be communicating to their other electeds, especially the sheriff, that's huge, that pre-trial piece. I mean, this is somebody who hasn't been convicted, and we're shipping them away. And it's completely inappropriate. And then there's times when we have these booking restrictions, and we're having to put somebody back out into the public. It's okay. I get apparently that decision's been made and safe enough, but they're not getting directly into that program, and then they're having a second or a third violation because they really should have been put into some type of a program that we have available, but if they don't get booked, we can't put them into it. My 2 comments as this moves forward is that the transparency piece, when we say 2 members from City of Bellingham and Whatcom County, are we saying specifically those need to be elected?
Yes, what the agreement says is it's actually a bit more specific. It's the mayor and a council member.
It says representative.
A representative, sorry.
Or designee.
Designee, Whatcom County executive, and a designee, 2 small city representatives, and then the task force member.
Because I think if it is that specific to saying elected or designee of electeds, it's important for the community that might still be dragging their feet a little bit on this to understand you're going to have a huge input on how this jail is being run by who you elect into office, and then they're having that. And it's an oversight advisory board, so I think it's not just an advisory board, it's overseeing this whole process.
And April, I think it's, and just from the different perspective, even though it just says 2 elected officials, and it could be anyone in the world who's going to be the mayor. I think it's important to have like a policy person and an administrative person because of the difference in information we each have in that kind of a meeting. So I would encourage us to think about that when we're appointing somebody if this goes forward.
Yeah. I think that's it.
So this item is for information only. I'm going to take Dan and then Pinky before we wrap it up, but this will be coming back to us. This is not our last discussion on this. So go ahead, Dan, and then we'll go to Pinky.
Quick clarifying question. Item 13 on page 145 of the packet says agreement duration 30 years not to exceed. I don't understand it. So we leave after 30 years?
Well, I think the point for us was if we can pay the bonds off sooner, we'd like to pay the bonds off.
That's not a use agreement. Is that a use agreement or is that a financial agreement?
So, yeah, Peter Rufato, I think that we have agreed that that won't be the case, that it won't be 1 year's notice. I think we have agreement that is use for the existence of the facility. I believe that's the case. Is that, you understand?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So we've been working really hard to separate out operating from capital, and they're still intertwined sometimes. So if we can pay the bonds off sooner, we want to pay the bonds off sooner. But we don't want to be excluded from the facility. And so the guarantee is that if we pay for that facility, we have that 15.8% of the beds as long as the facility exists. So I was talking about, can we pay it off sooner? I hope so. Do we get kicked out in a year? No.
Pinky?
I'd just like to put my name forward as the city council person who serves on the jail advisory board for continuity of this process. So we don't have to decide that today, but I'm just saying I would like to put my name forward.
Starting early. Okay, great. Thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I will go on to the next item, which is an ordinance authorizing $23,854,031.15 for reappropriations of goods and services ordered in 2016, but unpaid at year end. Basically, we passed this ordinance just last meeting, but there were some omissions, and so it's being brought forward to us again. Mr. Henshaw, our finance director, is here to discuss the ordinance.
Thank you, Michael. Brian Henshaw, Finance Department. So your new policy has us bring it back to Committee of a Whole. As Michael said, this was presented. The only change was to correct an omission of a $12 million loan to pay for the pre-treatment at the water fund. It doesn't change anything other than the accounting on where the money is coming from. This was originally budgeted in 2016 as a bond, and we lost track of it, and that's why we're coming it back. So on page 147 of the packet, you will see a red line version of the ordinance which we presented 2 weeks ago, and then on page 150 in the packet is the strikeout of the $14,689,000, and you'll see now that there's a $12 million and a $2,689,000 line on there, and those are the only changes. So
and for we have a motion?
Second.
And a motion is second. And for those at home, because there was an item added to the packet, if you have a more updated packet, the page numbers may be different. Any further discussion on recommending passage of this ordinance tonight? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passed. Right, we'll now go on to approval of minutes. We have one set of meeting minutes from April 24th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approving the meeting minutes from April 24th. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
And we have that motion passes 6-0 with one abstention. We now then go on to old and new business. First, I would like to announce that there will be an open house for the public and for our city staff to invite everyone to come to the new city council offices, which we share with the hearing examiner. We're scheduling that for this coming June 14th at 12:30, and part of the reason we schedule that is that'll be right after the noon flag raising ceremony for the Bellingham official flag, because that's June 14th is Flag Day. Other items under an old and new business. Dan.
I'm going to make a motion to reschedule the town hall, and I'll tell you why. This is the affordability, affordable housing. I think that the venue is way too small. There's only 80 seats, and I think there's an additional capacity for 20 people who can stand. The partners that the housing expert partners that we invited weren't invited until last week. So it was within a 2-week period. This was a bit of a scramble, but I'm mostly concerned about the size of the venue. There was a campaign event recently that featured homelessness as a topic, and 200 people showed up. So I just want to, we talked a lot about communication at the retreat. We talked a lot about how we need to move forward and be better at that. And I think inclusion is a big piece of communication, and that I think we're going to have more than 80 or 90 people show up. So, and I realize a lot of work's that went into it, and I do appreciate that. But I want to make sure that we are responsive to our constituents, and so I'm going to make that motion.
I'll second that, because I do think the venue is going to be too small.
Okay. So in response to that, one of the reasons why that was chosen is we didn't really have a budget for this, and that facility came made to us free. If we do move to a larger venue, there might be a small facility charge. That certainly isn't a deal breaker. Dan?
I think that we could probably talk with our partners at the school district to see if Bellingham High School might be an option, or some other, some other facility that has a larger seating capacity, so we can be more inclusive with our constituents.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Well,
April?
I'll certainly support. I'm also, in the literature that's gone out and watching some of the discussions on social media, people are a little bit confused as to what this is going to be like. And when I was looking at the timeline, this leaves about 30 people that are going to have time to come and talk to the council, which we've done that in a night here. So, one, people are thinking there's going to be a lot more opportunity to address the council. And then I think I would like to try to message a little bit better on, here are our legacies, here are our values. Like, how are we going to get there with the housing piece, or something to help spur conversation, versus coming in, and I know there's a lot of rallying right now to come tell your story of that it's so difficult, and I think that's important to hear, but I think giving some real direction on this is where we're going, and we're trying to understand what are those problems, what are the concerns. And I just don't know if it's our first time going out. And I really want to make sure the first time is very successful. Having watched other electeds open houses, I mean, sometimes it just ends up into a bit of a match of people just being angry, and there's not enough time to respond, and sometimes people don't even want to hear the response. And how we really set it up and how much staff support we have is going to be very important to the success of it. And it's either going to be wildly successful and people feel like they were heard and we're going to think of some next steps on what we're going to do, or it's going to be another failed attempt to have better communication and people feeling like we didn't listen.
So in response to that, we are preparing materials that will help set the context for the discussion. But we only set an hour and a half aside originally. So is there interest then in expanding that more to 2 hours? The bulk of the program was set aside for hearing from the public, but with a shorter program, even that big middle portion is shorter. Are we interested in going to a 2-hour program, which would be another half hour of public commentary possible?
Would be in favor of that.
I'm seeing a couple head nods. Okay, so
Maybe 7 to 9.
Probably 7 to 9.
That's fine.
Just so the public knows about the
I'm gonna be
event
there
which we
'cause
may
you're
not be
changing the
having.
date.
The doors were to be opened a half hour early. There was an open house portion where the partner agencies would be able to have present or tables and information available in the lobby of the Mount Baker Theater, which we would use as an overflow space. But the program itself would be in the Encore Room, which is smaller. I assume we'd still have that open house portion ahead of time. But maybe expand the program, look for a larger venue. I've already talked to Marie about this. We can put out the word and change that. I want to apologize to Mount Baker Theater. They've been very accommodating. This is not something we've done before, and they've worked with us to think about this. The folks at BTV10 have been prepared to film this event. They can certainly be moved. Thank you to them for all the work they've done in preparing it. Is there anything else? So,
Well, if you're changing the venue, probably it might not be the same date then, right?
no, I don't think we could change the venue at this point.
No, I mean, it won't be the same date if you're going to go somewhere else.
Well, I'm assuming we're just going to have to reschedule and postpone.
Yeah.
We'll try to do that maybe within the month. I don't know what spaces will be available to us. So the motion is to postpone the town hall meeting, to reschedule it at a larger venue and with a lengthier program to allow more time for comment. Any further discussion? April?
I think it was also to identify a little bit more of what that information is going to be that we're going to be giving the community. I think, for example, I was on the Boundary Committee for Public Schools, and Chris Behe did an amazing presentation showing this ridiculous amount of growth that's going on in the North End and is impacting our schools, and the children in those schools, and the school districts having to redraw boundaries and figure out, because we don't have equitable growth going on right now, and we don't have projected equitable growth going on. So I just think there's some really interesting things that we could show to almost spur people thinking and beyond just what people are already ready to bring forward now, but what are we looking for? Like, what are we looking for from this? Is it just to hear what your current concerns are and what your upset is with it? Or are we specifically saying, here's our values, we're trying to get there to the values, the built environment doesn't match those values, and how do you think we should move forward? Like, what are your suggestions? What are your problems? But targeted toward more than just affordable housing.
Well, so what I'll do is I'll make available to the council members the information that we will be sharing. As I said, it's mainly for setting context rather than telling people where we're going, because that's something that the council has to decide. It's a public discussion, not something I was going to state. And I kind of agree that there's been a little bit not enough time to prepare and message on this. The way we've been talking about it is, rather than have people focus on the problem, because we know what the problem is and that's what the context, the information is, but to move forward to say, what are your best ideas of things that we, the city, things that the private sector, nonprofit sector can do on the housing issues. So we want to make it more kind of a positive, bring us your best ideas, rather than talking about what the problem is, because I think we can provide the information what the problem is. So this would give us a little more time to improve that invitation. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion to? Go ahead, Dan.
So I just want to be clear. Who is retooling or who is preparing that program? Is that? I mean, I'm happy to. I volunteered at the retreat to help on the communications piece, but I would like a little bit of help.
Well, at this point, I've been organizing the event, but if you'd like to give me further direction to include another council member in that planning process.
Yeah.
Your wheels.
Dan looks like he wants to do it.
Yeah, I'll do it, but I don't want to do it alone. And I'd like to be able to come back to this body with a proposal that you could, be in agreement with.
I'd be happy to work with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm unclear on So my role is organizing the event and the logistics. What is this piece that you'll be working on?
This is helping to frame how we will be discussing these issues. Like the program, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keeping in mind that most of it will be open mic commentary from the public.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
Terry?
Well, I was just, this was starting to morph.
I know.
And I was getting concerned about this, that this is going to be us telling people.
I agree.
These are our values, these are our things, when I thought the original idea was to listen. And so I just wanted to make sure we weren't going off in another direction where we're going to getting to the yes that we want them to be at.
So
and
that is my understanding at the moment, that it's mostly hearing from the public with other aspects too. But if you're willing to change direction, I need to know that. I saw Pinky first and then April.
So our direction on this was not just a listening, it was a informational that shows the entire spectrum so that everyone has an opportunity to look at everything that's on the table and make observations and comments. So if it was just about comments, we could do that here with a public hearing. That's not the intention. The intention is to be informative and to listen.
April?
Well, and I think it's important because I specifically cited our legacies and our strategic goals, not my values, not your values, the values that we have put forward as a community, and we have them. They're on so many documents. They're everywhere. So when I was talking about let's really stay focused on the things that we've already put out there, we as a community have agreed to these things: social justice, environmental justice. So these aren't values that we're just coming up with and saying this is where we want to go. Those are the values that I'm talking about, that they need to be communicated, and we need to not forget that we've been through that process, and that's where we're trying to get to. So those solutions should be taking us to those strategic goals and commitments.
The toughest job of all is going to be Michael running the meeting, because I can guarantee you this is a quote town hall meeting and people are going to get up there and say whatever they want about whatever subject there is. I mean, that's the problem with setting one topic. So all I can say is good luck, and it's going to be tough on the moderator, I can tell you that.
And I'm comfortable with that messiness that comes with genuine democracy, and that I hope that some of that will occur. At the same time, we're not going to be arriving at this event without already having understood the problem, already having ongoing programs and policies and values that are guiding our actions. But the majority of a town hall is that messy democratic component. That's the middle portion, what I'm calling the middle portion of the program, which would now be expanded by another half hour. Yeah. Okay, so the motion before us is to postpone the town hall event to reschedule in a larger venue with a slightly longer programming. These two council members over here, Dan and April, will be looking at the messaging. I will provide you with the materials, the background materials that we have developed, and you can start with that. Some of these materials were developed with information provided by the administration, but right now the administration is not running this program. It's something that we are doing on our own with, some assistance. I could use more, or they could use more. Depends on what we come up with. I was feeling a little bit bad about postponing this, but the truth is we're making this up as we go along. I hope people understand that we want to get it right. Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, sorry, Roxanne.
Well, one of the joys that I had recently is this year I got to serve as the board member on the Mount Baker Theater. And they recently celebrated the theater's 90th birthday. And so I definitely wanted to extend a happy birthday to the theater. The event that they had in relation to that was an excellent fundraiser that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the theater, which was very helpful. And it was a great festive event where everybody dressed up in 1920s attire, and the bathrooms for the females were even for flappers. But also, I just wanted to suggest that anybody in our community, it's not too late. You can still send a birthday gift to the Mount Baker Theater in the way of a financial contribution, mountbakertheater.com. The second thing I wanted to bring up was that the firefighters recently had their firefighters ball, and I wanted to just thank the department for having us there. That was another great time. Councilmember Knudsen was there. So thank you. That's the end.
Anything else under old and new? April.
So we've had several different groups coming forward to talk to us about rental concerns and barriers, and I'm interested in exploring a different way to move forward with having a very public process. I've spoken with the mayor, I've spoken with Director Sepler about the potential to develop some working committee meetings within the planning committee for council, setting aside some time to, one, invite people to tell us what are the problems, what are the barriers, and then work with staff to frame those issues, and then of course invite in the next meeting some stakeholders, some management companies, what are their concerns along with the process, and then of course a fourth or fifth meeting to work with staff to develop a potential, like a suite of solutions. But it would take time, it would involve the community, we'd be doing the work in front of people, not in a separate work group behind closed doors, and I think it would be a really unique opportunity to really see what the whole umbrella of the problem is, and then us strategically go in and figure out how we can do that working along with the community and then all the community at home too. So my motion is to set up that series of working committees within the Planning and Community Development Committee to explore these rental barriers and concerns, and then of course work toward solutions.
I'll second it. As chair of the planning committee, I'll second.
We have a motion before us to refer to committee, in a sense, discussion of rental barriers. And, yeah, if you could restate the motion.
Yeah, so set up a series of working committees within the Planning and Community Development Committee to explore rental barriers and concerns and identify a suite of potential solutions.
Dan?
So, I'm sorry, just to clarify, so it would be the Planning and Community Development Committee just acting as a public work group on these issues. Is that what you're...
Basically, yeah, we'd bring, like our next meeting, we would bring forward the people, the different people, like Opportunity Council, talk to us, and then have opportunities for other stakeholders.
Okay, I get it.
Any further discussion of this? This is a referral to committee for the Planning and Community Development to host a series, to turn itself, in a sense, to a working committee to look at rental barriers, to look at the problem and propose possible policy solutions. I'm not on that committee, so it won't affect me. Okay.
That should probably just be a motion for the committee, really, because they're the
But
ones
we decided that had to come up anew and
Mr. Sepler, you're our planning director. Do you have any comments on that?
I think using the committee structure to hear from members of the community, get the different points of view, frame the issues is very helpful. I think we start with a common knowledge, and we'll be able to find out what issues might be resolved without legislation, but just by processes. And then really focus, are there issues that are in the purview of the City Council that could be addressed through legislation. So I think a very healthy and robust exercise.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously 7-0. Jean, that's your new marching orders. Okay, we'll now adjourn to executive session. We've had one item added to the executive session. It's potential, so in order, they are a litigation, Rideout versus the City of Bellingham and David Frick. The second item has been added, potential litigation and potential property acquisition, both together as one item. The third item is collective bargaining strategy session with the Fraternal Order of the Police. And the fourth item is collective bargaining strategy from the Teamsters Local 231. The total of those four items is expected to be 50 minutes. We will now recess, and I will come back here at approximately 4:30.